Good afternoon and welcome to the ad hoc scrutiny panel for residential housing stock, health and safety compliance. I wonder if panel members could introduce themselves, please. Linda.
Good afternoon. My name's Linda Summers. I'm a co-optee on the panel.
Thank you. Councillor Lee Richards.
Good afternoon. I'm Sue Lee Richards, councillor for Newsom Ward.
Thank you. Kevin.
Good afternoon, Councillor. Kevin McAllister, independent expert advising the panel.
Thank you. And I'm Councillor Liz Smage. We have apologies from Councillor Amanda Pinnock, Councillor Anthony Smith and Councillor Harpreet Uppal. So the minutes of the previous meeting are in the meeting pack. Do we first of all agree them as a true record? Yeah.
Yes.
Are there any matters arising from that are not covered on the agenda? No. Okay, thank you. We then move to interests. Are there any interests to declare? Councillor Richards, have you got any?
No.
No, I haven't either. No. Okay, and this meeting is in public. We've no deputations or petitions that have been received. So let's move to water safety management and lift safety policy review. If the speakers could turn on their cameras and mics and introduce themselves, please. So Eric, is it yourself that's going to lead on this?
I'll lead off, thank you, Chair. Eric Hughes, Head of Business Assurance and Transformation in Homes and Neighbourhoods. I think this is a fairly well-worn path now, Councillor. This is the final two of the 6 main policy areas that you've been reviewing over the last few meetings. These two have been slightly different in the past because they were corporate policies, which we've now particularly brought into line with homes and neighbourhoods requirements. They are in the standard format that we've agreed for previous policies, so hopefully they read across as such for yourselves as members. Other than that, I'm really just happy to take questions or comments, Chair.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to open it up to questions, but just before I do, I'm just going to remind everybody that in the minutes of the last meeting, we talked about inclusion of a list of key performance measures that will be used within the policies, how they will be calculated, and any further detail being included within the underlying procedure. This would assist in providing a golden thread through policy to procedure to performance. I just thought I'd remind people about that minute before I open it up for questions. Okay, any questions or points to be raised on these, Linda?
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions on both policies, I think. On the water one, though, on the water one, this read as no, sorry, I'm getting myself confused. On the lift one, my apologies. Yeah, it's okay. On the lift policy, I'll get there in the end. There's only 2. You would have thought I might have got it right, wouldn't you? On the lift policy, this read quite differently, because if I'm reading it right, pretty much all of this is contracted out effectively.
It is, yes.
And therefore this is more an exercise in contract management than about setting out what you do and then monitor and what have you, really. And that being so, it creates a sort of interface with what you refer to, I think, the corporate land and something department, property department.
Corporate landlord, yes.
Yeah, which I'm guessing is the contract management side of it. And then you guys in homes and neighbourhoods. So that's an interface that we haven't seen in the other policies, really. And therefore creates a risk of blurred responsibilities and what have you. And I noticed there is a sort of note on the policy to say that you were going to be discussing roles and responsibilities at the Building Safety Assurance Board.
Yeah.
And I wondered how that conversation had progressed and whether you are comfortable that it's clear as to where responsibility does lie on this policy.
Yes. I wasn't actually at the Building Safety Assurance Board last week, I'm afraid, so I can't comment directly on the questions, etc. But my understanding, if anybody else that was there wants to come in now, was they were reasonably content that there was clarity of roles and responsibilities. But as I say, I wasn't there, so if anybody else, Assad or Naz, I believe were there. I'll put my teeth back in.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Yes, Chair, we're having, it's an ongoing conversation. It's been going on for quite a while. Chair and members of the panel, we do have a contract management arrangement with our colleagues in corporate landlord. The contract's been in place for a number of years, and it doesn't just cover housing, it covers all lifts across the district, across all types of buildings. We have to do a bit of work in terms of just firming up the actual service level agreement, if you like, in terms of the requirement for housing. So we're doing that piece of work, Linda, at the moment with our counterparts in the corporate landlord team. We did discuss it in detail in the last Building Safety Assurance Board, and there's a separate exercise for Alison Williams and for Chris Watson to do as part of actually firming up those service level agreements to ensure that what we do falls in line with HSG, the health and safety guidance, in terms of inspections on a prescribed date in particular, and that they don't go beyond that prescribed date. So that's a piece of work that we're doing. But clearly the responsibility for managing the supplier sits with our corporate landlord colleagues, and we are classed as probably the end user at this stage.
That makes sense, but for example, at paragraph 4.5 of the policy, it says the head of building safety has operational responsibility for the management of lift safety. But how does that sit with the fact that a completely separate contractor is actually doing the work?
We'll discharge that responsibility through our colleagues in corporate landlord and ensure that the requirements, as I say, coming back to those specific requirements under HSG are discharged. So from an operational point of view, I'm looking for the supplier to provide clarity that those inspections will be delivered on the prescribed timescale. But I'm doing that through our relationship through corporate landlord, because we don't have the contract directly with Homes and Neighbourhoods. It's a wider contract. But I think it plays out in terms of the key performance indicators as well, which is something else that we need to develop into the policy.
So again, if I could add to that, the head of building safety is our Homes and Neighbourhoods responsible person. And no matter who ultimately discharges the actual act of the lift servicing or whatever else, it's their responsibility to make sure those things are taking place to the prescribed timescales, schedules, etc., and level of quality. So within Homes and Neighbourhoods, they are our responsible person. I think, as we possibly already know, there is some mutings that building safety person may, from the point of view of legislation, may not be a role going forward, but that won't affect the person within Homes and Neighbourhoods who will have that responsibility for ourselves. Okay. If that makes sense, yeah?
Yeah. And then I had just another smaller question really about the lift policy. Where you describe the scope at paragraph 2.1, it talks about applying to people who have a responsibility for or come into contact with lifting equipment in communal spaces. So this policy then isn't covering domestic lifting equipment and hoists and things like that then, is it not?
I don't believe so, but Assad, unless you want to correct me in any way. Yeah, again, so again, the legal requirement, Linda, as we know, is and the HSG relates to commercial lifts, not domestic stair lifts. So that will be a separate discussion, and that's a separate requirement. That's another piece of work that we're doing, and I think we made reference to that in various updates that we provided to Building Safety Assurance Board. They're detailed in the pack. So at the moment, we're only reporting against our passenger lift arrangement. So that just purely relates to passenger lifts, commercial passenger lifts, because that's where the HSG obligation sits.
Right. Okay. So there'd somewhere be a separate policy about domestic stair lifts and hoists and what have you, would there?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I had a couple of questions about the water one, but I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I'll just on the lift. Can I just ask a couple of questions on the lifts? So at page 9 of our papers. So what you've said is that Homes and Neighbourhoods are the contractor to corporate landlord who is responsible, if you see what I mean. So you're the commissioner, as it were. They're the people who deal with it. and then they put it out to contract. Yes.
I think we're the client. I think we're the client.
You're the client. Okay, you're the client.
Not the contractor.
Yeah. Right, you're the client. Corporate landlord. Even though even though these lifts are within spaces that you have responsibility for, so you're the client for the lifts. They're the body that organises the maintenance, and they're the ones that put the contract out.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So how does it work then that Homes and Neighbourhoods will support the corporate landlord team in operating effective contract management arrangements with the contractors? So how does that work? If you're the client, if they're the ones that are putting out the contract, how are you to operate effective contract management? So what I'm trying to get at here is, so if a lift, for instance, if a lift hasn't been repaired in time, or a lift hasn't had its inspection or whatever, who is responsible for sorting this out? Because this sort of just is it's a bit muddy. Just,
Yeah. Okay, I'll pick the first point, Chair, first. In terms of support, we will provide day-to-day support. So, for example, if the contractor, if the inspection company wants to access the building and they're having an issue to try and access the building or parts of the building, then we will assist, and hence the word support. So we'll continue to support colleagues in corporate landlord because, like you said, we're in control of those buildings, not corporate landlord. If a lift isn't serviced, we monitor that. We monitor the dates that those lifts are due to be serviced, and then we'll instruct, we'll escalate it back to corporate landlord to ask the question why it hasn't been done and when it can be done. So that, again, that's continual support. It's a hand in glove arrangement that we have. So we'll monitor those dates, and it will be the compliance team colleagues that will raise that concern if a lift hasn't been serviced. So if we haven't received notification that the lift hasn't been serviced and we haven't received the certificate of inspection, we will raise a concern immediately with the corporate landlord team, who will in turn inspect or will chase up that query and request a date from the lift inspection company or the supplier.
Okay, so do you have an SLA in place for this then?
No, we don't, and that's the piece of work that we're doing at the moment. We've been talking about an SLA for a long time, but it's something that we can't affect because the contract's actually firmed a number of years ago, so we can't now introduce an SLA mid-term. But it is something that we've discussed with corporate landlord a number of times to say actually the SLA should be quite clear. The lift should be inspected before or on at least on the day of inspection, and on a couple of occasions that's not been the case. So we've had those conversations, say, well, we can't afford to miss those dates, so we need a firm SLA in place. But again, that's part of that conversation that we're having with colleagues in corporate landlords. Say, can we introduce some terms and conditions that are specific to those particular requirements?
So who has the health and safety legal obligations, yourself or corporate landlord? Not yourself as in you, but yourself as in Homes and Neighbourhoods. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I have a responsibility. Yeah. I'm the responsible person, then I'm responsible to NAS as the accountable person, and so the corporate landlord, they have that same responsibility. So they have a responsibility to service the contract. So they'll have Chris Watson as a responsible person, and they'll escalate that as well to the accountable person in corporate landlord.
Right. It just seems a little difficult, does this, Naz?
Homes and Neighbourhoods as the landlord,
yes,
is the responsible one.
Yeah.
So the social housing regulator is not concerned by other services in the council. It's concerned that the social housing landlord and the registered provider is the one that is accountable and holds the ring. So we would see, although they are still part of the council, corporate landlord are just another third party in that scenario, that we are managing a supply chain as if we were a contractor or a consultant or whatever. So all the thread always flows back to me and the Homes and Neighbourhood service.
Yeah, okay. So this is why I can't see why you wouldn't have a service level agreement.
It's perhaps something we need to go away and consider, Councillor Smith.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's I just anyway. On other points, about entrapment issues and lift contractor attending, etc., and that remedial actions through routine servicing will be resolved at the nearest opportunity. Now, there's nothing in here that says about how you're going to manage for vulnerable people, where there's vulnerable people who can't manage the stairs. And there's no linkage as well to the fire safety policy. So I'm just wondering if a lift, for instance, if a lift is out of action because it's not been the nearest opportunity and somebody's stuck because they can't get down the stairs because there's no lift, so they can't go down to, I don't know, the communal lounge or whatever, you know, go out or anything like this. How's that working? Because it just seems that it's quite, the wording is quite loose in the policy. And also, where is the linkage to your fire safety policy? So presuming that nobody would use a lift if there was a fire and things like this. So, you know, where is the sort of the linkages? Thank you.
So in terms of the urgency to complete works, although it's not written into the policy, we do have some terms where you know we expect repairs to be carried out within a prescribed timescale. I can provide that information to the panel, so I can get those and forward those on. It doesn't specifically link to the fire safety policy, and we would, in every case, in the event of a fire, not use a lift. The lift would come to ground floor, and we'd use other means to evacuate. But we can provide that link in here in terms of writing that specific link into the policy, Chair. It's not a problem.
All right. I think this is where your procedures and your policy and your KPIs and things like this should all come together. And that we're talking about that golden thread. Do you know what I mean? I think that's, I was disappointed that these policies didn't have the things that we talked about previously in them. You know, you hadn't used the opportunity to put them in these. So I think that's where all of this will come together. And to assure ourselves that in actual fact you have the policies and you have the procedures, etc. Can I ask about record keeping? So it says in the lift policy, you'll support the corporate landlord and property team in keeping all records for at least 5 years and have robust processes and controls in place. So how are you being assured that the corporate landlord, if they're keeping the records, has the required records that you need to ensure that you've got everything that is necessary for full compliance?
We would do an annual check, or at least an annual check, wouldn't we, Assad? But I think we're asking for this on a more regular basis than that at the moment.
Yeah, it is. We've got records that we request directly from the supplier. The supplier maintains a database. They have an automated system, Chair, of recording and maintaining files. We have access to that system as well, so it's an online system. But we also receive updates from corporate landlord who are using the same shared drives and are archiving information as per the HSG guidance. So it's all in accordance with health and safety guidance. And those records that are being retained for that period of time for any inspections. And it's an insurance requirement as well to retain those records. So it's all documented by the insurance company who carry out the lift insurance inspections as well. So it's probably not in here. It's probably going to be in the procedures document, but it is all in the background being implemented.
So if I was an inspector and I came in this afternoon, you could pick up straight away some information that says these are our lifts and these are the records for our lifts up to date.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And you've not put in an audit time frame again on your policy. Okay. Any more questions on the lifts? No?
Sorry, could I just ask?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Kevin. Do you want to go first? I was only going to ask, who you mentioned the servicing and it's an insurance requirement. Who checks the quality of the servicing of the lifts? Whose responsibility is that?
That's the responsibility, Councillor Richards, of the inspection company. Because it's a specialist area, we don't have the qualification to go in and check that. So we'd expect we check the competency of the company, we check the competency of the engineers, but we can't actually check the competency of the work. So it's a certification scheme, but that's why we have the insurance inspections to come along and do those third-party checks to make sure that the lifts are in good order, that they have been regularly serviced and the right components have been recorded on the inspection sheets.
Right. And presumably that servicing includes sort of thoroughly cleaning areas of the lift gear, and especially the pit beneath the lift.
Yeah, they'll clear any debris, they'll service the lift gear, they'll lubricate and just repair everything. And what they'll also do is they'll carry out a condition assessment, which then tells us when certain components, key components, need to be replaced, and they're then updated onto the component replacement system. So when they come up for replacement, that advice is then followed through when we replace those parts.
Okay, just on the components and needing replacements, I don't know if it applies to lifts as it does to other things, but there seems to be built-in obsolescence with lots of things. Is there a suitable supply of replacement parts to keep all the lifts in good order and serviced and working?
Yeah, they're all UK supplied lifts, installed by UK companies in most cases. Components, if they do become obsolete, it's up to the manufacturer to let us know in good time. But certain components do reach the end of their useful life, and then we'll replace the lift in its entirety. We'll replace a lift gear. So we do have a program of capital replacements over the 30-year plan as well.
Right. So all this is recorded presumably on a big data spreadsheet somewhere.
Yeah.
And checked.
Yes. Yeah. So we get the notifications for component replacements and lift replacements from colleagues, and then we put those into our asset plan. So when those are notified and those dates occur, we have the information. We sense check that before that particular date, say is it still current, and then we'll put those into a program of replacement.
Thank you.
Kevin.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. I was going to raise the same points as you, just regarding the minutes from last meeting. Raised 4 generic points I'd expect to be applicable to all policy, to all the policies. So if we can have confirmation that those will be added to all policies, that would be helpful. And the second one was just regarding your point, Asad, around the servicing of the stair lifts and the through floor lifts that will be within domestic properties. You'll have some through floor lifts and some stair lifts as well. There have been there was a really high profile fatality a couple of years ago due to the lack of transparency on one of these domestic lifts being serviced. So I just wanted that clarity on exactly which policy that sits within and where that's monitored if it's not within this lift safety policy.
Yeah, we're still going through that, Kevin, to understand. We have approximately 400 lifts, through floor lifts, stair lifts, platform lifts throughout council housing stock. So we're just going through and ratifying if those lifts are still in existence, because in some cases they've been installed a number of years ago, and then we're going to put them into a program of replacement. Property services are going through those at the moment and checking that each lift is still in fact in place and still in fact in use. And then we're going to roll out a program. There is a clear HSG requirement at the moment to service those lifts because they're domestic. So we're just trying to compile that information in anticipation to start that program of servicing. And I suspect it will be a 12-month interval inspection on those. I don't know if there's anything to service on those, but it'll certainly be a 12-month inspection, and then we'll take the kind of repair from as a follow-on from that inspection.
So is that then going to sit within this lift policy, and so it can be monitored there?
It will sit under the umbrella of lifts.
Yeah.
Albeit they're domestic lifts and these are commercial lifts. So it will probably append to this, because the arrangement in here at the moment refers to the commercial lifts and the fact that we have a third party in corporate landlord, so that the other lift arrangements and servicing will probably sit with property services, because they are competent in order to do those inspections and lift repairs as well.
Okay, so I understand the difficulties with managing the domestic stock. There's an awful lot more lifts. The communication isn't always as great, and the services arrangements aren't as clear. And that's exactly why it does need somewhere defining in a policy. Said this is what we're going to do, this is the frequency we're going to do it, and this is how we're going to monitor it. So I would feel more comfortable, even if it's a placeholder at the minute, and it's it's not forgotten about.
It's not, and we've been reporting it on the compliance KPI dashboard up to recently. We've taken it out because we're not actually clear on the number of lifts, so that piece of work's ongoing. So we'll introduce it back in, but we have been reporting it, and we have been commenting that that exercise is ongoing. But it's quite a large exercise to get to every property, inspect it, determine if it's still required, and then put it into a programme of inspection.
I think if I could add to that, Chair, if you don't mind, it is obviously a piece of work that we are cited on from the point of view of we understand that we don't understand the full picture, if I can put it that way, based on Nasad's comments about the number of lifts and whether they're still in operation, etc. I think I'd be happy to take your steer as a group as to whether the domestic ones should sit under this more commercial policy with those third-party arrangements with contractors, or whether actually a separate policy specific more to homes and neighbourhoods and domestic settings will be a better way forward. From a policy point of view, you can write them either way, hopefully to provide the focus and the comfort. But if anybody has any particular view as to what the best approach would be for ourselves, be happy to take that on board. And also obviously pick up those points that you've mentioned, Kevin, from last time, because obviously we've been on a roll with these policies at the moment, and we will make sure everything else is included in the next set of revisions going forward. So
yeah, okay, the next set of revisions, when are they?
Well, we've committed to reviewing everything at least on an annual basis.
Yeah, so okay, so the next set of revisions is going to have what we've asked for. Okay, I think that I can feel a recommendation coming on there. Kevin, did you want to come back on the domestic lifts?
I'd keep it in one policy. I don't think it needs. I
Yeah,
think most places will have one policy that encompasses everything, rather than have a separate lifts depending on which contractor's delivering it. I'd keep it within here.
I would have said I would have kept it. I would have separated it within the policy, made it clear which was the domestic and which was the commercial. But yes, I would have. Yes. Naz, you wanted to come in.
Thank you very much. Resource capacity is absolutely tight at the moment, which is why the team are kind of referring to making the changes that you've requested as a panel in the next review. However, if we can find the resource, we would want to do that earlier rather than later. And I was going to say, you'll just put it in the recommendations anyway. And I think I've just heard you say I feel a recommendation coming on. So I think it's absolutely right that we should look to tweak those with the comments you made at the last meeting, but also at the first set of policies, I think, where you asked the question, where are the KPIs? And we said they were going to be in the procedure notes. But I think what I'm hearing, and I think that's the assumption we went away with, that we would be putting them in the procedure guides. However, I think what I'm hearing now is that you'd like us to have them in the upfront policy documentation for clarity's sake. And so we'll go away and endeavour to make that happen. And given that it will end up in the recommendation to Cabinet, we'll have to do it sooner rather than later, I think. So if we kind of say, if your report's likely to go to Cabinet in June, July, then we'll endeavour to have it done by September.
Yeah. Okay. So it was add a statement to the policies, inclusion of a list of key performance measures that will be used within the policies, how calculated, and then further detail being included within the underlying procedure. That's what we asked for. So it's the headlines in the policy and it's the detail in the procedure, but there needs to be that thread through. I think, I don't know about anybody else, but I would be concerned if these policies weren't, that didn't happen to these policies within an appropriate time frame. And I think that's where certainly, I mean, I wouldn't want to presume on the recommendations, but I think we're all of the similar mind in that we're asking the same questions about these. Okay, so I think that is something that we would want. And we mentioned about appropriate wording to all policies to confirm that remedial actions will be undertaken within the relevant timescales. The how you'll handle the recording, management, and validation of compliance data, and the cycle timeframe for monitoring for audit to be explicit. It all applies to all these two as well as the ones that we've had before. I don't know whether anybody else wants to come in on that point at all. Kevin, if you want to follow up at all? No? Okay. All right. Let's move to the water then. So I'll open it up for questions. Linda, you had some for water.
Yeah, I did. Thank you. Sorry, just a couple of pedantic things to start with. Sorry, I know this is really irritating, but we've got a reference to asbestos at paragraph 4.4, and we've got a reference to gas engineers at one of the bullet points at 3.3. So it's where we've got, again, road cut and paste from other policies, I think. And also your numbering goes awry in paragraph 5. The first 4 sub-paragraphs are headed 6 point something, but it's 5 point something, I think. But anyway, that's the detail. I think for me there was just one general question really that I was left with after reading all of it. Is I didn't have a sense of the routine day-to-day monitoring and checking of water quality. I could see a bit about opportunistic stuff, which I don't mean in a bad way, but as before a property's let, you'll take the opportunity to flush the water systems, get that. And I could see something about at the far end of the process that if something goes wrong and there's an emergency, you'll get somebody out quickly. But I couldn't see anything in it about the day-to-day inspection and maintenance. So where you say at one of your bullet points at 3.3 that you'll establish emergency procedures for responding to an incident where high levels of Legionella have been detected, I wasn't at all clear how you would have detected that somewhere had high levels of Legionella, because I couldn't see anything in this policy that talked about the routine monitoring process, really, unless I've missed it and I'm not understanding something correctly.
I think, again, this probably falls back to some of the detail in the management procedures, because we're talking about setting management plans for properties. Because, I mean, again, Asad's more of a technical expert on this than myself, but my understanding is we're monitoring for Legionella when a property is void, because obviously we have to re-let it in a condition which doesn't have Legionella. But then our other properties that we're monitoring on a regular basis are the communal properties, such as sheltered schemes, etc. And again, there's a programme in our management plan, which is, a schedule of testing, etc. for those properties. But I believe each property can be quite different, Asad. So it's difficult to have a complete understanding of what that plan is within a policy.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to come back on that, Linda, as well, we don't at the moment have a regular programme for doing domestic properties because, again, the legislation doesn't call for that. What we do is we monitor buildings of risk. Those are communal blocks where we have a higher risk of potential exposure to Legionnaire's disease. So those are 44 blocks that we continue to monitor. And as Eric says, we continually monitor those on a regular basis on a cycle based on, again, the technical guidance issued under the health and safety guidance. So that's in place. We are actually at the moment assessing all domestic housing. So we're doing sample surveys across various archetypes to say, well, actually, we're notwithstanding whether they're commercial or domestic, do we have a risk of Legionnaire in domestic properties where we have potentially stored water? So we've got combi boiler, there's less of a risk there, but we know that we've got a number of properties where we have stored water in cylinders and the like, and we have header tanks and the like still in place. So we're assessing those properties at the moment to determine if we need to introduce a programme of regular inspections to those domestic properties, which then supplements our existing programme to commercial properties, or communal properties, should I say.
I think that's a really helpful explanation. I would have expected something to that effect in the policy, really. I appreciate the detail wouldn't be, but something that says that we have a proper programme of inspection for communal areas and a risk-based analysis effectively of domestic areas, and we'll maintain that. And then how you do that would sit in your underlying procedure. But for the policy not to say anything about the sort of steady state stuff, just seemed a bit of a gap to me. But that's my
no, we can add that. We can add that. Thank you.
And that was it from me. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions on this one, Kevin?
I think just following on from Linda's part, I think perhaps that detail in the KPIs would clarify out what your targets are, and it could result that'd resolve it as well if we had visibility over what targets were being monitored in terms of which properties are getting assessed, and then again, you know, the timeliness in terms of dealing with actions as well. The domestic stock, I don't anticipate you'll have an awful lot of actions in relation to us, but you perhaps will do in relation to the communals.
Yeah, we do regular temperature checks, we do dosing, we do clarification of tanks and the like, Kevin, so that's all part of that regular inspection programme.
So I know the KPIs for all those. I'd imagine there's a range of KPIs for those. They're all present in the procedures at present, and perhaps the visibility on those within this policy would give us the reassurance, you know, the more visibility on what Lynn's asking for in terms of what's happening how frequently.
Yeah. Yep, of course.
Okay, I just got a few points. I think at 3.3, it's probably answered my question. Linda's point about domestic or communal areas has probably answered my point, because you say prepare a management plan and takes the steps to put into place, and I'd put a question who for. Do you know what I mean? It's not clear. And then you're saying about all water systems are flushed prior to letting. Well, yes, absolutely. But, you know, when does that prior take place? I think that's a thing, because you could have done some plumbing work, etc. in the property, but you could be waiting for a new gas meter or electric meter, and you could be waiting for a little while before the property gets let again, if you're waiting for something, if you've got long lead times or something. So it was sort of, where were the timescales on that? And also, you've said about updating and maintaining an emergency procedures, but there's no timescales for review. I know something else I'm involved with, some emergency planning, those get reviewed once a year. I get an email once a year to say, is this still the case, and etc. Do you know what I mean? It's just, there doesn't seem to be any frequency. And then undertake regular water quality audits. Well, what are you meaning by regular? And communicate to other persons. Who are the other persons that have a duty to cooperate? You know, I'm just not sure who you're going to be communicating to in that regard. Thank you.
Well, from the point of view who we communicate to, obviously that's internally amongst ourselves. I think obviously if we suspected that there was an issue with the supply of water from outside, we'd obviously be having conversations with the water board, etc. I don't think there's a set list in that sense, is there, Asad?
No, it depends on the circumstance, I suppose. There could be an occurrence, a particular occurrence. We could have could have water cut off. We could have contamination in the wider water supply from Yorkshire Water or from the utilities. We could have an incident with sewerage. You know, it could be an issue across a number of things. So it would be specific, but there's a number of stakeholders that we look to work with and cooperate in that regard. In terms of emergency procedures, Chair, yes, I absolutely take your point that we do need to be more specific in terms of the review of emergency procedures and which procedures in particular we are looking to review. But in most cases, in the regard to water hygiene, it's where we've identified high readings and we need to put in place some immediate control measures. So we need to carry out disinfection of the tanks, or we may need to carry out repair to pipe work or to main components. But I take your point, we need to put that in there, and also if we've had a confirmed outbreak, what arrangements we have in place. So I can add all those to the policy.
Okay, and what about your flushing prior to letting?
So the flushing is a chemical flush, so it's not dependent on the heating and light being on. So we'll put a chemical through the system, and that's done. That usually lasts 3 to 4 weeks. So it allows the system to be. So we do that in accordance with the kind of void process, and we try and do it at the start of the void process, so anybody working in the property is not exposed to any issues. If it's longer than 4 weeks, we probably have to go back in and do another prior to let flush as well.
Yeah, just needs to be a little bit more in place, doesn't it? Okay, any other points on this? No? Okay. So to summarise, I think we've asked for more information to be in the policies because we're asking the same questions each time, aren't we? And we've asked about SLAs, and we've asked for some information to be added to policies, and we've asked about and I've lost my piece of paper where I wrote my note. Lifts, council housing stock in the lifts in council
Domestic
housing
lifts.
stock, domestic or whether it's communal lifts as well, and the policy changing in that respect. Okay, all right, right, okay. So I think, do you have a time frame when you would be able to give us an example of a policy with the things in that we keep asking for to demonstrate how you're going to do that in all of the policies?
I wouldn't necessarily want to give you one off the top of my head now, Chair, but I think one of the things that, picking up on your broader point, that I think you would want to see is potentially them all together, so you can see the read across. I'm not so sure whether one example would actually be. I mean, it would be an example, but it would only be that, an example. So with that in mind, it might take a little bit longer, but I'll have to have a conversation with Assad and his team, the technical experts, to be able to put those things in place, because obviously I've not had any conversations at all about things like KPIs that you've been talking about today, to be added to policies for teams. So I wouldn't wish to commit here and now to that timescale, but certainly it should be before you complete your final report.
Yeah. Is there any requirement from the regulator for all of this? I would have thought the regulator would have wanted to see, you know, a root and branch sort of thing with your policies, your procedures, etc. No?
Not from the point of view of any specific regulatory standard about these types of policies. I mean, obviously there is the home standard, which says we have to deliver to the required standards at any moment in time. There is no, from my understanding, fixed policy or process from the regulatory point of view that they're saying, because obviously if there was a template that we could have used from the regulator, we'd have already been using it. But obviously when they come and look at the home standard, they will look at the policy, they will look at the procedure, and they will look at the evidence that you're following that. So that's the underlying golden thread that we've talked about. So
Naz, did you want to come in, Naz?
On at the end there, Chair. So in terms of the regulator's expectation, is, as Eric has just said, that we need to have robust policies in place, and as you have rightly challenged us, is to think about the golden thread right down to the delivery front line. In the ongoing arrangements that we have in terms of relationship with the regulator, particularly on fire safety, we've advised them as part of the compliance review that Anthony Brown did for us, Councillor Smays, that one of the recommendations was to standardise and make the policies more consistent. So she'll have a watchful eye on that for that reason, but it's not normally an expectation that, and we've not created an expectation through this ongoing dialogue that they will review our policies in that sense. But there's always an expectation that we keep them up to date, refreshed and reviewed in line with organisational and operating models, as well as legislation. and regulation, that might change as and when. So, they would expect us to regularly review those as well. But I think in terms of the more narrow question you're asking us, I think they would expect us to have the sorts of things that you have asked us to insert in them.
Okay, yeah, it just seems they're sitting isolated at this moment in time, that's all. Okay, all right. Thanks ever so much, everybody. If there's no more points on those agenda items, thank you for attending the formal meeting. The